Hey guys, this is Larfen. Time for a new episode of my replay analysis. Our first replay is going to be Nightshade Overkill by Nightshade. So this is going to be a quick little Sambo split cap. And so let's look at it. Alright, so we start off with this opener. So this opener I like. It's pretty smooth. You can see that he gets into this low position because in Sambo that's pretty much required to start with, and I mean because it's Sambo you fall down so easily, so you need to store up a lot of energy to use it to push yourself back up again. So drops down and then does a nice little flip with his hand and like pokes you in the face a little bit with his foot. I like that. It's a little cute little movement, and it doesn't ruin his momentum at all. It's just a little tap on the face. I kind of like it. I know I said in like the last episode I don't like little taps sometimes, but I mean, as always, there's always some context in which anything is good. So whatever I say, there are always general rules. You can probably get away with almost anything in a replay that I say is bad at any point. It just needs to be in the right context. In this context, the little face tap is really nice. So he gets that, and then he gets a little tap on the chest, which is also really nice because it sort of bends you over, and it's just he uses it a little bit to continue his spin a little bit too. You can see that he pushes off against it, and then he gets a little bit of an extra spin to finish out so he can bring his right foot back and push off. So that's definitely a good movement to use as well. One thing I didn't really like was that the knee contracting was a little bit too sudden. I feel like his knee was extended and then contracted really suddenly. It didn't fit with the flow very well, in my opinion. I think it would have been better if he had maybe contracted the knee initially and then relaxed it. That's definitely a tool that I use a lot of the time when I don't want to move as fast as possible. It looked like his knee was contracted the entire time it was moving. But if you contract it until it starts moving and then you just relax it, then it'll complete that movement at not full speed. So that's definitely a trick that you can use to move a little bit less fast and make your movements a little bit less jerky sometimes. But so he gets his knee back and then he plants it and uses that for a spin and does this little jump which I think could have been a lot nicer than it was. It looks like he uses a lot of the power from this push off to move up rather than around. And in my opinion, moving around is a much better look than moving up in a replay. It's just better. Spinning is nice. I think that's a generally accepted thing in replays, that spin to win. If you spin, then you look good. So I think it would have been better if he had somehow angled this kick to make it more of a horizontal spin motion rather than the vertical jump that he gets. I mean, he does spin a little bit because, I mean, as you can see, he gets a 180. But it looks like a pretty slow spin, and getting up into the air doesn't really serve much of a point to this kick, I don't think. And also, as you can see, when he gets up into the air, he has to keep his hip extended to make this kick, which looks really awkward. You definitely want your hip to be contracting while you're making a kick, because in this case it looks like his hip is just extended the entire time that he's making that kick. So it's not like he's kicking forward, it's just sort of like he's kicking his foot out. And it's definitely not as good as if he had gotten a contracted hip. And I think he could have gotten that hip contracted in this kick if he had used his kick to get a more of a horizontal, rotational kick, rotational momentum off that. So as you can see, I really don't like this kick. And also, you can see he lowers his shoulder and extends his knee at the same time. And of course, I'm all for using all of your body to make your kick as strong as possible. That's definitely something I preach a lot, and I think is pretty much one of the most important things you can do. But in this case, the fact that he's so suddenly moving his arm down makes it pretty obvious that it was just for the sole purpose of this kick. If he had used his arms maybe to help with this jump, as you can see, his arms are pretty much held for this jump. Maybe if he had like raised them and then lowered them for the kick, that would have definitely been preferable. Because he doesn't use his arm. It's like he remembered to use his arm suddenly when he needed it for the kick. Because that's a more explicit need, I guess. You don't always think of all of your body during everything that you do, but when you actually need it to dismember with a kick, you're like, oh wait, I have arms. So I really would have liked for him to use his arms a little bit more just throughout the replay rather than just when it suits him. So yeah, really not a fan of that kick. And also you can see that he hits with his shin. And the shin doesn't do the decap, which is good, but he still hits with the shin, and the shin is the first thing that hits his head. So you don't want that. You want your foot to look like pretty much the entire thing. Your foot is doing the whole work, and the shin is definitely getting too much of a piece of that head in this case. So, moving on, after the decap, he does a really nice job at landing that. He's tilted back a bit from his jump, so he does a really good job at stabilizing himself with that right leg there, and drops his left leg and pulls out into a spin, like taps the head a little bit again. So that's definitely a good follow-up to that decap. He lands it. He makes a landing, flows into it very well, and gets a cute little thing into it. And if I were him, I would have just gone into a pose pretty much right here and ended the replay, because as you can see, he goes back and gets another 2 kicks in. After this decap, I think the replays pretty much should be over, unless he got a follow-up split immediately after that kick. Like if he had maybe contracted his right knee, used his right arm to push himself close, like he could have lowered his shoulder and raised it, and that could have pushed him closer to Yuke's body, and he could have gotten a kick with his right leg there. And I think that would have been preferable to what he did here, because he uses his arm to push him away from Yuke, and then starts to go back towards him, which I think you shouldn't do. I think you should try and get as many hits in a row as possible, and you should never purposely move yourself away from Yuke after you have already engaged him. Hold on a sec. So I really don't like that he continued the replay from this point. And also, like, he doesn't move back towards Yuke quickly enough either. Like, when he does decide to move back to Yuke, I feel like he should have gone back with more of a vengeance, I guess. He sort of just meanders slowly and does a little spin on his foot. And after the opener, I feel like it really doesn't flow well, because it's a lot slower than the rest of the replay. So lands, he just sort of spins around, and the movement there is a little bit jerky. Like his legs are repositioning themselves a lot. He's using his arm to keep balance. It looks like this was not as well thought out as the earlier parts of the replay. But then he gets a kick there, and gets that second kick. The 2 kicks are pretty good, I will admit. The first one is a little bit weak looking, but the follow-up is definitely solid. So I will give him credit that the 2 kicks here are definitely good. And then he's a little bit twitchy going into the pose here, but I know from experience that posing smoothly is one of the hardest things to do in this game, especially if you're doing a held sambo style like he is here. So I'm not going to give him too much crap for that, but I mean, you do want to try and make sure your pose is as smooth as possible, but I do realize that's very hard to get into a pose position without a little bit of twitchiness. So, I mean, overall, this replay it's definitely competent, but there are a lot of mistakes that I feel like could have been fixed while making it. Our next replay here is going to be Drop That Thang For Me by Duck, who's becoming somewhat of a regular on this show, I've noticed. So this is a classic Madman, with a little ski at the end, and let's check it out. Alright, so 100 engage distance opener. I've said before that I'm not too much of a fan of them, but I don't think that this one is too bad, because he definitely is a little bit goofy in it, and shows off a little bit of this ultra relaxed style that you're going to be seeing through this replay. His movement is definitely really floppy, I've noticed, in general. It can be good or bad, depending on the situation. I think he just needs to work more on his overall execution, deciding out what works with his style and what doesn't. But it definitely has the potential to be a really pretty kind of movement. So he starts off little lean back thing here, and just goes for a straight up kick to the arm. It's definitely not a super creative way to start a replay, just a little arm kick there, but I mean, I don't think it's meant to be there to be creative. It's just there to sort of start him off so he can move into the rest of it. So it's not too much of a problem, because it's just the first thing he does. It's just what starts it off. And then he gets another little crotch kick there. Normally, I would say this isn't a big deal, but given that later in the replay, he doesn't go and attack those legs, I think I really would have liked for that to get just at least one dismemberment. And it's definitely not a good position that he's in to get any dismemberments. He's kicking directly on the crotch block, but I think he could have managed to get maybe a hip or a hip, glute, or knee dismemberment on that kick. But I will say that in the just looking at it from where it is now, that's not a bad kick. Just kicking for the sake of lifting him up a bit, that's not a bad thing to do all the time. It definitely puts Yuke in a nice position for him to continue his Madman. I just think it would have been a little bit nicer if he had gotten a dismemberment on it. So he gets that second kick, and then he lands and goes into a jump for the spin kick. I do like this spin kick. It's nice. You can see that he sort of flicks the ground with his back leg and simultaneously kicks off with his other leg and goes into a nice sort of 360 spin into the split kick there. That's a good kick. I have no problems with that move right there. That 360 spin kick there is nice. So then he follows it up with a quick grab here, and then just brings his right foot in for a 2 dismemberment. That I do have a problem with, though. I think the situation that he has right now, I think he could have easily gotten himself a boom hit there. I think what his problem was here, and these kind of kicks can definitely be awkward to execute, because your forward kicks should generally be made while you are grabbing with the same hand that you're doing the forward kick with. So he's not in the position to... The situation that he has does not allow him to be kicking with his right leg. I think the decision to kick with his left leg there is definitely the correct one. But there's a few things you need to keep in mind when you're kicking with the cross leg rather than the same leg. For one, it's generally always good to lower your shoulder when you're doing it with the same leg rather than the cross leg. But with the cross leg, I think it's definitely beneficial a lot of the times to keep your elbow held a bit. You can, if he had kept his elbow held here, then maybe extended both of his glutes here, he could have gotten a much nicer angle on this kick and not ended up with the shin hit that he ended up getting here. You can see that he's getting a lot of shin on that hit. and as you know, you generally don't want that. So I really would have liked to see him use his arms and glutes a little bit to aim that kick, so he could have gotten more damage on it. Because I think he could have easily gotten a 3 or maybe even 4 dismemberment kick on it if he had aimed it properly. But he gets that 2DM with the head and pec, and then quickly follows it up with the same leg kick, which he has a much easier time getting and making it look good. Once again, I think he could have squeezed out an extra dismemberment, and I think it would have looked a lot better to and it's nice that when the part that you're holding gets completely dismembered. It's really good when you're just completely destroying whatever you have your hands on. So I think he could have easily gotten a second dismemberment on that kick, and it would have been good. And another thing, there's still a decent amount of Uke left. You can see that he has that big, juicy ass region that you're going to get a lot of dismemberments out of. And in a Madman, you really want to get as many dismemberments as possible, because that's sort of like the point. And you can see even his hand is touching Uke here. It would have been very simple for him to get that grab, then just pull his pec back and hit him with that left leg, and I bet he could have easily gotten a boom out of that, because you can just see he could just lift up that leg, spread the legs, and get his foot right in there and get a lot of dismemberments. So I think I would have really liked to see that as a follow-up to that last kick, rather than just stopping the dismemberments there. But he decides to stop the dismemberments there, and then he goes into a really interesting skeet. Interesting is not a bad thing. So he gets a little punch on the lumbar. I don't know if that was intentional or not, but it was cute. And he has a really nice spin out of the end of this Madman. I really like that spin that he executes there. I almost would have liked for him to just not do the skeet and just continue that spin, because it's a really pretty setup that he has there for himself. But he ends up doing a skeet that I haven't seen, I don't think, really anyone do. So he grabs with Uke's hand. I'm going to just go and assume that he's not like cheating or anything and moving Uke other than the grab hand. And the grab hand itself, I don't mind. Like, if you're just grabbing Uke's hand, that's an acceptable thing to do in a replay. Like, a lot of people you'll see, they'll do skeet dismemberments with Uke's hands with the self-damage on, and they'll grab him with Uke's hands to get a dismemberment. I've done that tons of times, and that's totally acceptable to do in a replay. But that is the only kind of Uke moving that you should be doing in a normal dismemberment-based replay, which is grabbing his hands. So I'm totally cool with this. But the skeet itself is a little bit odd. For one, it is a full-arm skeet, which I have no problems with. I do like full-arm skeets. But I feel like it would have been nicer if he had kicked it towards the head, and also if he had gotten it a little bit more loft on that kick. Because as it is, the hand just sort of rolls and then just bops that little chest pec piece at the end. And I think it would have been a little bit better if it didn't hit the ground before it hit the piece, because the bounce skeet is a little bit awkward. But I mean, it's not a bad skeet. I just think like it could have been a little bit better executed, or I don't know, maybe he could have broken the wrist on the foot and then he could have broken the wrist with his foot and then followed up with a kick skeet or something. I think that might have been nicer. Definitely a lot harder to execute, mind you, but I think it would have been nicer. It's a really interesting skeet. I just don't think the execution is as good as the concept of it is. It's definitely a good idea, but I just don't think he managed to do it in quite the fashion that he wanted to. And then he just sort of goes into an almost anti-pose. And I mean, it's not too bad, because there's no, and there's no rule that says you have to pose at the end of a replay. It's just sort of a nice thing to do. But I don't like that he just does that at the very last frame when it looks like he's already sort of going into a half pose at the end here, because you can see that he kicks it and then his leg's back. If he had just like maybe contracted his right knee, extended his left knee a little bit, got into a little pose, that would have been nice. Maybe he could have extended his left glute to get a much better balance on it, because as you can see he's sort of falling sideways. But what he does is a little bit questionable, I think. So overall, this replay definitely has a lot of ideas. It has a lot of really cool and interesting ideas, I think. I think just the execution is a little bit questionable a lot of the time. But overall, this is definitely a promising replay. Alright, so our last replay here is going to be from Skaggs, or Skaggs, I'm not sure how to pronounce it. Get Oak Treed V.2. Skaggs is definitely an up-and-coming, really impressive replay maker right now. So I'd say definitely look out for him, because he's making some really nice stuff recently. So this is going to be, I'm thinking this is, I don't know what gravity this is. This might be like a multiple gravity thing even, I don't know, but it looks like a Sambo opener, and then he uses Nuthug's little gravity changer script to change it to classic gravity mid replay. I'll give you a link to that in the description, because it's definitely an interesting little thing that Nuthug made. So it starts off with a really crisp, really fast spin in the opener. I really like it. He just whips around really quickly and falls down into a really nice pose. I said in the past how this is sort of a boring pose, but the fact that he gets into it very quickly and leaves it very quickly makes up for the fact that it's used quite often, in my opinion. So you can see how he just spins into it really quickly and then gets out of it very quickly. So that's definitely the right way to use that kind of positioning. So he uses that push off to give himself a little bit of a spin around, and he starts off with a non-DM on the little on the hand there. I mean, given that he follows up with a lot of really fast hits, I don't have too much of a problem with it, but I think it would have been nice if he had gotten a wrist dismemberment there. I think that might have been what he was initially going for even, but he just couldn't manage it. So I don't know if that was on purpose or what, but I think I would have really liked to see a wrist dismemberment there. But then he quickly follows it up with that knee dismemberment down there, and gets a really oddly placed grab there, and that's definitely a dismemberment in this replay that I don't like a lot. The knee dismemberment is really cool, but it's sort of weird how he gets this pec dismemberment. It's really fast, so it covers up for the fact that it's a grab dismemberment and all that. But when you look at it in slow motion, you definitely want your replays to be good under scrutiny as well as leaving a good overall impression as well. So it's a bit of an awkward second dismemberment there. And also you can see how he sort of wraps his arm around the shoulder there to get that grab dismemberment. So it's a really weird sort of looking move that he does there. But then he gets a really fast, he uses that arm to give himself a little bit of momentum to get that 2 dismemberment glute hip kick. You can see that that's actually a really cool move that he does there. Normally you wouldn't be able to get that much speed out of it, but you can see that he's using the weight of Yuke's arm to pull. He's using that to give himself like a counter force to push off on, so he can get a little bit more power on that kick, and gives it 2 dismemberments. And you can see that he doesn't do anything with that arm, he just lets go of it. So that's really a clever move that he does there. So that's a little interesting thing to note. And then he just uses that hand to do a little backhand decap really quick. You can see a little bit that he hits Yuke's head with his wrist first. 1 second. He hits Yuke's head with his wrist first, and then it's another grab dismemberment, which, I mean, grab dismemberments are generally frowned upon because they're kind of seen as cheating. But given the speed of this replay and just how he's doing all these dismemberments incredibly fast, it definitely makes up for that fact. So he uses that grab to spin himself around, and he uses that to get a elbow dismemberment, and then he brings his other leg up and gets a hook on the chest piece. Everything's good there. Everything's fast and clean. And then he does one last kick on the pec there on the ground. So overall, this is a really fast replay. It's very fast and very precise, which is definitely something to be admired. There's a little bit of shortcuts that he took in the replay that take away from its overall quality, such as the multiple grab dismemberments and the fact that he has this weird sort of grab on the arm that he sort of like swings it towards his face and all that, and it hits his body a little bit. But overall, this is a very nice and cleanly executed replay, and it's definitely very good. So that's going to do it for this week's episode of my replay analysis. So you can send in your replays as always in my email and through PM on the forums, and I'll see you next week.